So it's funny to start off the 1990s. I feel like the best way to talk about the early days of the 1990s, like 1999, 91, would be talking about the band that, whether you hate them or like them, they still change music to this day. We're going to be talking tonight, starting off tonight, we're talking about Nirvana.
Okay, I have to say it.
And Bill goes first. Go ahead.
To say. Now, listen, if you've been watching this channel for a while and watching Mixed Bag, all our faithful viewers, we know who you are.
We know who you are.
We know who you are.
Oh, yeah.
You all know my opinion on Nirvana. I think they are one of the most, if not the most overrated band. I think they're just super overrated. But I will say this. Even though as much as I think they're overrated, I cannot deny that they changed music.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the 1990s, it's hard to not think about Nirvana. I mean, despite Bill thinks they're over, I don't think they're overrated per se, but I would say that Nirvana is one of these bands that is definitely like, they lasted 4 years. I mean, they put up like 2 or 3, I think, if not 4 albums, and that was it. But I mean, the genius of Kurt Cobain, personally, I mean, he was a genius for what he was. Dave Grohl has gone on to do great things with the Foo Fighters,
and we'll talk about that next week.
Yep, we hit the 2000s.
We'll talk about that next week.
Yes. But what do you got, Bill?
No, continue. I'm sorry.
You're good. So Nirvana, it's funny. Going into the 1990s, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of rock music, we're going to touch on other genres tonight too. But going into the 1990s with rock music, you actually start off with a lot of hair metal thriving in 1989 to 1990. A lot of hair metal acts, Warrant, Rat, Poison, all these bands were doing really well. And then what happened?
The 90s came. And the grunge
90s came. And grunge was launched. Go ahead.
Grunge. Okay, here's what you got to know about. Okay, and before I begin, I'd like to give a shout out to my very good friend Vinny Levine, because he always says this. He hates Nirvana. He hates grunge because grunge killed hair metal.
It did.
And you know what? First, I want to say, he is a good friend of mine, but you know what? I want to say this. Tastes change all the time in music history. They change.
They do.
Tastes change all the time, folks.
They do. It's just the truth. I mean, it's almost like when people the record company was like, all right, well, let's this unknown band from Seattle, Washington, known as Nirvana. I mean, they went on to literally change music history, and like with one album with their Nevermind. So it's almost unfathomable. You almost can't even process what was going through back then,
And it's like this. You got to think about it this way. You got to think about it this way. Nirvana is, because with grunge in general, this is why grunge knocked off hair metal, because there's some historical context that needs to be known. Because in the late 80s, going into the early 90s, there was some instability. 1987 was actually the biggest stock market crash since the Great Depression.
Yep.
There was, which was famously called Black Monday. And then in the early 90s, the start of Operation Desert Storm, which really just led to a great angst of the generation that was coming up.
Yeah.
That just led to a great angst of the generation that was coming up. And that was in the 1990s. Like, I could be wrong on this, and if I'm wrong, I'll take the L. But this was actually the first generation that was projected to not have a better course of living than to not have a better standard of living than their parents.
Yep.
So that among the group, that among young people in those days, kind of led to that angst and that anger. That kind of is put out in that music. And you kind of feel like the mainstream is screwing you over. And you know what? Like with Nirvana, I'm not just talking about hair metal. Like when Nevermind hit number one, who did it knock off?
Yep, that's right. You can talk about it.
It knocked off Dangerous by Michael Jackson.
It took the number one spot on the Billboard 200 so quickly. Out of Michael Jackson, the king of pop.
Who was, we talked about him last week when we talked about the 80s, but this, they talk, like I said last week about Michael Jackson, at that time, he was the biggest star on the face of the planet. And this, at the time, little known band from Seattle knocked him off the top of the charts.
Yep.
So that really shows you that grunge was getting in to the mainstream, which also I think eventually led to its downfall. But we'll talk more about that when we talk about other grunge bands, because we all know the big song that took everybody by storm from Nirvana. And what was that, my good man? What was the song that Nirvana took by storm?
Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Okay, you know what? I think I gotta say it, because if I don't say it, JT, no one else will. I have to say it. Are you ready?
Go ahead.
Smells Like Teen Spirit is a song about nothing.
Literally, it's about nothing.
It's literally a song about nothing. What does it mean? What is it about?
I honestly have no idea. I mean, the lyrics, like, here we are now, entertain us. I mean, we could dig into the psychology, but that'd be like a whole episode of Mixed Bag, truthfully. So,
coming soon, psychology of Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yeah, we'll do a one-shot video.
But anyway, it's okay. I gotta admit, the opening riff is pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a new wave of people like being anger and full of aggression and stuff like that. So,
they said there was a deodorant called Teen Spirit, but Kurt Cobain said that had nothing to do with the song.
Yeah,
that had nothing to do with the song. And do you think you'd really want a song like that to be in an ad for your commercial, for your product?
No, not at all.
It'd be like a happy product. We're all here, entertain us. Here we are now. So
yeah, literally.
Yeah, but like I said, Nirvana only lasted 4 years, because unfortunately in April of 1994, Kurt Cobain committed suicide.
Yep.
And that was the end of Nirvana. And like I said, I'm not a huge Nirvana fan. I said they're one of the most overrated bands, but you cannot deny the influence they had on music. You can't.
I mean, they are widely regarded as one of the top best-selling artists ever. I mean, Nevermind sold like millions and millions and millions of copies.
Yeah, and because and should I save this point now, or should I wait till when we talk about the end of grunge?
What point is that? You might as well just say it now.
Well, because you know what? Okay, the grunge lifestyle in itself is kind of a rejection of mainstream culture.
And it really is.
basically like a counterculture, like what we saw in the 1960s with the hippie movement.
Yeah.
But you know what I think really like, because Kurt Cobain hated the mainstream, like he hated Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yep.
He hated it. Like that's why there is never a live recorded version of it.
Yeah.
That's why there is a never live recorded version of Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yeah. I mean, he hated he really hated how successful he was, despite having tons and tons and tons of success.
Because I remember watching a documentary years ago, and he said like the thing he hated was, these are his words, not mine, yuppies driving around in BMWs listening to his music.
Right, exactly.
And I think at the end of the day, Nirvana and some of the other bands we're going to talk about,
yeah,
they became what they despised.
Yeah, what Bill's trying to say is that they didn't want any part of the mainstream success, and yet there they were selling millions of records. It's kind of like a ironic thing to how they actually just like, hey, we're here and we don't want to sell any records. We don't want mainstream success. We want to fight it. And Pearl Jam did that. We're going to touch on Pearl Jam in a second, but they kind of did that too.